They left their disabled adopted daughter to die, only for fate to turn the tables. Their adopted daughter became disabled, and they left her in the forest. Believing they had permanently solved the issue, karma didn't wait long to manifest what would happen to those. Remember to subscribe so you may avoid forgetting who dared such a daring act and what repercussions await them. Leave your comments where you're viewing this and don't miss our following tales. Jessica changed the lace trim on her top for the third time that morning, and her fingers quivering slightly. She stared into the big mirror kept on their immaculately decorated bedroom wall. The room was evidence of the life they had laboriously created, gentle pastel hues for contemporary decor and the appropriate balance of elegant clutter to create a cozy but not chaotic look. On the dresser lay framed pictures of Jessica and Robert at their well-planned wedding and charitable galas holidays. None of those pictures included Naomi. Downstairs, Robert yelled out, "Jessica, you ready? We have to go in 20. "I'm coming," she answered with a forced smile. Looking back, 3 months had passed since they had returned Naomi from the adoption center. Everything had seemed flawless at first. Friends and neighbors complimented them for choosing, marveling at how absent, noble, and generous it was to welcome a black child into their affluent white family. Jessica had reveled in their praise, delighted in the comments, discussed how they were providing a youngster with a better life and acting morally. Naomi was happy, and the first weeks seemed like living inside a dream. Ready to please and nice-natured, Jessica was captivated to the child's beautiful brown eyes, which glittered every time she grinned. Robert, too, had first delighted her. Everything changed, even though their new family was playing with Naomi in the garden and flaunting her to their friends. Naomi started feeling sick, and those minor events started her down path. Experiencing tiredness following sloppy play and too early falling asleep. Movements then arrived with the pediatrician's diagnosis. Untreatable condition Naomi was displaying already would finally cause paralysis. Jessica's thoughts echoed the doctor's professional, chilly comments. Jessica moved forward irreversibly, clutching the dresser's edge. This was not what she had meant. Imagined adoption was meant to be a tale of growth and atonement, one of which of making a difference. Instead, it seemed like a dream she could not wake from. Downstairs, Robert walked close to the entrance door, tapping his watch nervously. "If we were late, the Gilmores will never let us know when it ends." Cynthia silently dropped down the steps, smoothing her skirt as though the performance itself might mend the fraying edges of their "I'll get the car running," Robert said, grabbing his keys and ignoring her. "Look there." There was tension in the air. Neither of them admitted, but Naomi sat silently in the living room, exploring strongly felt objects in the corner. The stuffed bunny she carried around, now so little and delicate in her brilliant red robe. Jessica's heart twisted agonizingly. The girl turned to see. "Mommy will play with me later." Jessica hesitated, guilt weighing down. She murmured, like a naturally delicious delay, but they both knew it was when in the early weeks tending to Naomi had felt fulfilled. Jessica had imagined herself as a heroine in one of those feel-good tales, a mother who rescued a youngster in need. Yet with Naomi's diagnosis, everything changed. Now the child needed ongoing attention. Every week that went by made it more difficult to keep appearances. Jessica and Robert started to dispute late at night, whispering voices from Ma's earshot. "He requires more than we could provide," he had remarked, slamming his glass down. One night on the kitchen counter, "Do you want to spend the next 10 years feeding her through a tube and cleaning her nose?" Jessica had shushed him, disgusted. "She is a small child, Robert, not." Robert only shook his head, tightening his jaw. "I signed up for this, not at all." Neither of them had, and they both knew that weeks had gone by and Naomi's condition got worse. She needed assistance around the house, and her once bright, active attitude diminished. Jessica felt herself more and more alone, unwilling to go. Every time they got an invitation to a social function, the house, or friends visited, Jessica felt under pressure to turn down, knowing the weight involved. How could she face anyone? That her life had turned Robert away from home as much as ideally you should be putting yourself into work and staying late at the office. Their talks got shorter and colder, interspersed with irritation, and one evening, Robert remarked, You can't keep doing this. He gestured. Killing you, Jessica, and killing us in the living room where Naomi sat silently coloring in a notepad. She questioned, "What are you saying?" Deep down, she already understood I'm saying. She could be better off somewhere else, where she could receive appropriate treatment. Jessica's breath seized in her throat. You're talking about sending her away? Look, I know it sounds harsh, but we have to consider our life as well. Robert stated. We cannot proceed like this. You know I am right. Running a hand through his hair. Horrible, but unable to argue a small portion of her dark, shameful part, she refused to. Their life would be simpler without Naomi, but the idea of leaving the child filled with questions. Her shame was so strong that one morning it felt like drowning. Jessica. Mommy will help Naomi get dressed. The little girl gazed up at her with those wide, trusting eyes, and will be better. She soon inquired gently, Jessica's heartbroken. I'm not sure, baby, she muttered, caressing the girl's hair. Naomi drew her toy bunny closer. It's okay as long as I have you and Daddy. Jessica choked back tears, but later that day, after Robert returned from work, he walked up to her with a disturbing tranquility. We need to discuss. Jessica knew what was next, but she allowed him speak anyway, hoping against hope he wouldn't say what she dreaded. We should take her to the forest. Robert murmured softly. Leave her there. Jessica only retreated from there. Appalled, you're crazy. It's the best thing for every one of us. She won't suffer. Will at last be free. Jessica shook her head, but her voice lacked conviction. So, Robert urged. This is our only opportunity. Jessica understood deep inside that this event had been. She realized she was too weak to battle him. Thus, against every building for weeks, she avoided every mother instinct guiding her heart. She consented the morning they headed for the woodland was clean and brilliant. Robert packed a picnic basket to keep up appearances. Naomi delighted in a day outside with her parents. Naomi's naive conversation filled the journey. Could we perhaps choose flowers? Any creatures? Baby, Jessica muttered, her hands shaking on the driving wheel. Robert helped Naomi out of the car and set the picnic basket next to the clearing deep in the woods. Her will be right back, sweetheart, Jessica murmured, pasting a smile over the tears blazing in her eyes. Naomi grinned back, totally trusting good mother. They strolled gently off. Naomi's legs felt like lead when she was sitting on a blanket with her pet rabbit, ignorant of what was happening. Once she returned to the car, once inside, she fell into the passenger seat, weeping relentlessly. Robert turned on the engine. Steer clear of her stare. His voice is icy and remote. We will never talk. Jessica buried her face in her hands once more, the immensity of what they had done falling on her, but the first thing they drove out from the woodland did was threads of something sinister and terrible started to untangle in both of their brains. This was only the beginning. When they got home, the house seemed shockingly quiet, as though it knew what they had done. Jessica stood in the silence, her breast tight with guilt. Their deeds weighted over them like a stifling blanket. Then, as Jessica ascended Naomi first noticed it when she climbed stairs to their bedroom. Her plush rabbit lay on the foot of. Her breath stopped in her throat. How had it gotten here? The air inside the home felt weighty, as though it were bearing guilt that neither Jessica nor Robert ventured to explore. Faced for days following their departure from Naomi in the forest, an unresolved conflict slung between them like a cable about to break. Jessica moved across the house. Like a ghost, her thoughts ablaze with Naomi's pure laughter, the picture of her small figure against the sunshine passing through the woodland canopy, but she couldn't get herself to talk of it. Robert seemed unconcerned as he continued with his exercises. Even though nothing had happened, leaving early for work, coming home late, drowning. Every time Jessica tried to express his conscience in work and drink, every time something, anything, Robert's icy contempt shut her down. It's done. He would reiterate any time she felt the bravery to bring up Naomi. There's no looking back. Jessica started to question if he really felt nothing, or if the front he presented so perfectly was just another layer on his denial. Late one night, after Robert had fallen asleep, Jessica watched the couch covered in a blanket. Her thoughts drifted back, flickers of the television without fully seeing it. every moment Naomi spent in the forest, from her smile up at them to the way her small hand gripped that faded stuffed animal. How had the rabbit landed up on their bed? Her breath stopped. She knew deep down she knew it, but she hadn't told Robert anything about it, not sure if she had dreamed the whole event. Hadn't been there when a gentle creak from the corridor shocked Jessica from her thoughts. Her heart hammered in her chest as she looked toward the stairs stretching her. There was just the stillness of the night for a moment. Then it returned to soft, leisurely creak, as though someone was gently descending the stairs one slow step at a gnat. Robert termed her voice hoarse. But no response. She stood, every muscle in her body taut, and headed into the corridor. Bare feet made no difference. Sound against the wooden floor as she neared the stair bottom. The steps extended upward and vanished. Jessica looked into the second-floor darkness, sensing the cold hold of fierce CLA at her throat, and then heard it softly from the top of the steps. Familiar voice, high-pitched and delicate, Mother Jessica, stopped her heart. Crashing against her rib cage, she knew voice understood it as closely as her own. Own, Naomi muttered, her breath seizing in her throat, but there was no reply, only stillness. She stood there for what seemed like an eternity, immobilized by fear, remorse mixed with doubt, and then softly the sound of footsteps turned back up the stairs. She stood by herself in the dark. The next morning, Jessica sat at the kitchen table with tightly clasped hands. Robert came into the room looking worn out and agitated around a mug of coffee. Like usual, but Jessica couldn't hold it in anymore. I heard her last night, she murmured. Robert stopped, his eyebrow wrinkling. What I heard, Naomi, on the... Her voice shook, but she pushed herself to keep on saying, She said stairs. Mommy. Robert looked at her, his face a mix of incredulity and frustration. You're tired, he mumbled, pouring yourself a cup of coffee. You need. I know what Jessica insisted upon. I know how to avoid fixating on this. Getting more keen, and it's not only that her bunny slept on the bed that night. We returned and asked how. Robert set his mug down with a hefty bang. You are seeing things. The guilt, Jessica, we both knew would be difficult. But we did what we had to do. She shook her head as welling tears filled her eyes. Something is awry. Robert is breathing differently. You have to let this go. Annoyed, nothing is happening. Jessica, yet, deep down, Robert realized it too. Over the next few years, days, the unusual events worsened. Doors they had closed would be discovered. Open. Jessica heard faint giggles in the dark of night, as though Naomi was performing. Somewhere just out of sight, stuff they hadn't touched. Naomi's drawings, her toys started showing up all around the house. One evening, Jessica discovered one of May's in the washing room. Crayons piled on top of the washing machine, shattered half the same way Naomi used to break them when she pressed too hard. Jessica gazed at it for a long time, her pulse beating. She eventually shoved it into her pocket as she questioned Robert about the fresh incidents. He discounted her once more. You're beating yourself up, he remarked. She's not here, so I should stop obsessing about it. Jessica knew better. Naomi was. She couldn't explain here in some sense, and that worried Jessica. One night, woke with a start, the sound of something clattering in the living room, pulse thumping. She pushed Robert awake. Did you hear? Robert groaned. Now Jessica is living in the house, whispered frantically. Robert sighed hard but left from bed. They both crept downstairs under the low moonlight streaming through the windows. When they arrived in the living room, throwing eerie shadows across the walls, they stopped on the automobile coffee table, one of Naomi's rough crayon sketch of 3 persons holding hands, a man, a lady, and a tiny girl. It was a painting Naomi had sketched soon after they brought her home, but under the picture, written in jagged characters, a single question begged, why you left. Jessica let out a choked SOB while her hands sprang to her mouth. Robert looked at the pale painting on her face. This had to be some sort of twisted joke, he whispered, even with his voice swayed. Someone had to have broken in. Who? Jessica murmured, tears down her face. That would do this. Robert had no. Jessica had to know, since she couldn't tolerate it anymore. The next morning, Naomi called every hospital and police station in the vicinity, but there were no records of what had happened to her. Missing child, matching Ma's account, she seemed to have had disappeared into thin air. Desperate, Jessica stretched out to Rosa, the woman running the adoption center, where they had first crossed paths. Rosa listened silently while Jessica stuttered throughout the narrative, omitting. Regarding leaving Naomi in the forest, I just need to know whether anyone had any experience with. Seen her, Jessica begging there. The other end of the line stopped long ago. Rosa then whispered softly yet forcefully, Naomi was discovered in the forest, Jessica's. Rosa stopped what someone discovered her and brought her to me. She kept going. Safe now, but she won't be returning to you. Jessica felt the earth tilt beneath her feet. Please, we made a mistake. Need her back. Rosa's voice hardened. You abandoned her. You left a small daughter alone in the forest to die. You don't deserve to have her back. Tears run down Jessica's face. Please, Rosa, I reported you to the police. Rosa said Jessica would sit and be startled with penalties. Quiet when the phone ended, and Jessica informed Robert upon his return home that evening. Everything she is with Rosa. Jessica whispers hollow, and Rosa informed us. Robert's face twisted with rage because woman had no rights. She had saved Jessica. Cut her off, her voice sharp, doing what we couldn't do first time since. Naomi. Robert's mask of serenity snapped, and he dropped into a chair, his head in his hands. What should we do now? Jessica watched out. We have to get her back. Her heart is weighty from the decisions we have made, she remarked gently. Deep down, though, she realized that the fight they were about to engage would cost more than they could have ever dreamed. The walls of their ideal world. Quickly, Jessica sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee uneathered before her as Robert walked the room, Rosa's call still hanging between them. She could hear the terror in Robert's voice now, a sound he could have suffocated. Fought furiously to stifle under his mounting rage. Robert mumbled, "She's our," running a hand through his hair. Irritation calls for rights. "Daughter, this is kidnapping," Jessica whispered, this voice weak. "What the heck does that mean? We left her." Robert shot her. "From the pressure we were under." Robert. Jessica, knuckles white with clenched fists. "Abandoned her. Rosa was right to take her, and what we are expected to just roll over and let this happen." Robert insisted on pounding his fist on the table. "We will lose everything if this comes out." Let me laugh bitterly, her eyes hazy. We had already lost everything. The rumors had started with tears, spreading faster than they could control. The whispers began at the neighborhood church, quiet grocery store. Inquiring whispers on the reasons behind Jessica and Robert's little black girl absence from public view. "Adopted," I heard someone murmured to another at the market. "Unwell someone." "No," came the quiet response. I heard they couldn't manage and kicked her off. Every rumor seemed like another stone tossed through their delicate glass of life. Jessica could sense every gaze from the neighbors and every grin that never quite reached their level of expectation. Calls for judgment. Even the local youngsters stopped playing close to their house, as though the dark cloud hovering there when Jessica went Sunday over Jessica and Robert was infectious. Whispers followed her across the church benches. People no longer requested courteous inquiries on Naomi's welfare. Rather, they traded eyes full of mistrust and pity. The stares pierced deeper than words ever. Naomi's laughter resonated through the unusual events in the house, worsening their frequency. Jessica discovered toys and artwork in locations she hadn't visited, in halls late at night. Touching for weeks, one morning, she woke up to discover a crayon-written message on the "Why did you leave me?" The broken message. Bathroom mirror? Little determination. Jessica had fled, then collapsed to her knees, crying as Robert discovered her on the "We're going to fix the bathroom floor," he muttered, clenched teeth, though his eyes were red-rimmed and bursting with a panic he could not disguise. Later that week, a basic white envelope started to show in there. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a subpoena Rosa had sent. Official complaint for child abandonment, and the legal system was now. Jessica's heart fell as she went over the words her hands had produced. Shaking, "They would take everything from us," she murmured, passing the paper to Robert. Then he read it in hush, his darkening visage with every word. "We refuse to let him," he growled. The legal fight started quickly. Robert engaged a smart and costly man called Lawrence, pledged to defuse the lawsuit against. Yet from the start of the trial, it was evident that things were not in Their advantage, the prosecutor presented the evidence with merciless accuracy. Jessica and Robert had taken in a youngster to show a picture of compassion and forward movement to the community, but deserted her in the case of declining child health in the forest. Trying to get away from the weight she had acquired, Robert closed his hands under the courtroom table as the words reverberated across the space. Jessica felt just numbing. Every word of it accurately reflected the moment Jessica had most feared. Arrived on the second day of the trial, her testimony resulted in the courtroom doors opening and the small girl wheeling into. Rosa accompanied the room. Her consistent presence provided Naomi the assurance to confront the people who had turned on her. Jessica's heart broke at the sight of her ma's pale but peaceful face.
She calmed her own
dark eyes now reflecting the innocent sparkle they had possessed. Instead, there was a guardedness in her eyes, a tiredness never seen in a youngster her age should ever experience. To Carrie, when the prosecutor asked whether Naomi wanted to go back to Jessica and Robert, the courtroom gasped. Naomi's small voice was clear but forceful. She did not. She said, "I heard those things, and I don't want to return." Jessica's world slanted. Naomi, the tears welled in her eyes and bit her lip to stop from crying. "Could you tell us why, Naomi?" Naomi nodded gently. "As they left me," the prosecutor inquired, muttered, her voice shaking but resolved. "I was terrified and they never returned, but Rosa discovered me and made me feel comfortable." Jessica buried her face in her hands, unable to stop the tears any. Robert sat rigidly next her, his jaw tightly closed to resemble. It might break the court's ruling. Swift might would stay under Rosa's. Jessica and Robert's guardianship was formally revoked from their paternal rights. They exited the courtroom silently, their defeat absolute outside. The courtroom media surrounded them, cameras blazing and microphones pushed into their faces. Robert made his way through the throng, dragging Jessica behind them. But the harm was already done. Their names now were connected with malice and treachery. When at last Robert slid into the shelter of his automobile, the driver's seat, his hands clutching the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "This isn't over. We'll find a way." Through clenched teeth, Jessica fixed her gaze on the glass, the world outside hazy through her tears. "There is no going back from this. We lost Robert." Stillness heavy, but Jessica sensed the same they had lost in her heart. All that counted, not only for their daughter, but also the essence of who they were, had once been. In the next days, their house seemed like a graveyard, cool, calm, and bursting with the ghosts of what could have been Jessica's wanderbout through the home. Regretfully holding Naomi's artwork and stuffed pets, aimlessly smothering her, Robert, unable to handle the fallout, poured himself more into work, remaining late and trying to avoid Jessica as much as possible. Once their marriage, built on common aspirations, ruins. One night Robert went home found in ruins. The smell of whiskey clinging to his garments caused him to stagger after midnight. Jessica was seated at the table in the kitchen, mindlessly staring at a picture of Naomi. "Everything is your fault." "If you," slurred his voice with bitterness. "Hadn't, if you simply listened to me." Jessica whispered, her voice hollow. "Avoid. You dare throw this on me," Robert growled. Too weak, Jessica stood. "You were meant to be her mother." Her chair scraped loudly on the floor. Robert, her father, laughed bitterly. "Well, you did a heck of a job." Something inside Jessica snapped, and she whispered, hands shaking with. Out of his house, Robert glanced at her with a furious expression, unreadable, then turned and staggered for the door as he lacked another word. Jessica collapsed to the floor, her body racked with sobbing, knowing deep down that the front door slammed shut behind him. Robert wasn't returning, and Jessica woke up the following morning not bothered about it. Robert's stuff vanished from an intolerable silence, and the bed next her was empty. Cold and empty, she sat up gently, her heart weighty from everything she had lost. The beautiful house, once vibrantly filled with Naomi's laughter and Robert's loud voice, was today only an empty shell, but for the first time in a long period. Jessica experienced something almost clear. She had lost her husband and had lost her kid, yet she was still here and had to figure out how to. She would strive not to get Naomi, stay on. There was only one thing left to do. back, but to grow into the person her daughter deserved, even though Naomi never pardoned her. The only way Jessica would spend her lifetime trying to rectify things would be ahead. Naomi's death and the breakdown of her marriage left Jessica drifting, her life disintegrating with every passing day, yet even as loss tormented her, a flutter of will started to stir. Although deep inside her Naomi might never return, Jessica knew she couldn't live with herself unless she battled to show she could be better. She had to attempt for Naomi's benefit, not for her own. It took all the will Jessica possessed. Had to go back to the adoption facility Rosa worked at. Her hands shook as she stood outside staring at children's hands painted in vivid colors on walls create striking patterns over the brickwork. She momentarily turned away, but something stopped her. Naomi deserves better from me. When she at last entered, the coziness of the venue struck her like children's laughing from the playrooms permeated the air with a resonance that Jessica hadn't experienced in what seemed like an age. Rosa showed at the doorway a sense of life and happiness. Rosa whispered gently, her face wary as their eyes locked on. You shouldn't be here. Though her voice lacked hostility, I knew. Jessica murmured, but I have to see her. Rosa shook her head. You gave up that right. I want to write things. Jessica begged, her voice to crack. Just let me speak with her once more. Rosa crossed her arms. You know words won't undo what you done. No, Jessica acknowledged. I know they won't, but I need her to know I won't stop trying, not until I become someone she can be pleased of. For a long time Rosa examined her, assessing the authenticity in her comments. Then, with a sigh, she turned away. Naomi's in the playroom, but I won't make her see you if she prefers not to. Jessica nodded, her throat too tight to talk. As Jessica entered the playroom, her heart broke at the scene. Before, Naomi sat on the floor surrounded by coloring books and dolls. Her wheelchair was folded neatly to the side. She now looked better, from livelier, more alive, as though the love she had discovered with Rosa had started. Naomi. Jessica's voice was gentle as Jessica and Robert healed the hurts they had inflicted. Naomi nervously looked up, her expression unreadable. There was no identification in her eyes, merely show a wary interest. What you are doing here? I came to say, gently. Jessica knelt down slowly, keeping her distance. Though they were all she had, the words felt insufficient and sad. She left me knowing. That small hands curled around the doll in her lap, muttered, and Naomi studied her. Every day she would regret it for the rest of her life. For a brief instant her dark eyes fixed you. You did not return. No. Jessica said she didn't, and I wouldn't forgive myself for a long time. Naomi said nothing. Then at last she said, why now? Jessica's breath hitched. Because I want to be better, and even though you never desire to see me once more, I will keep striving to be the person you deserved from the start. Naomi's eyes softened just slightly, but she didn't. I'm glad to be here with Rosa. Jessica's heart twisted agonizingly. Yet she forced a smile. I know. I'm happy to be leaving Naomi at the adoption facility. That day started Jessica's journey, but it was among the toughest she had ever done. Driven to prove she could transform, Jessica immersed herself into the legal fight, hoping the court would recognize her efforts and grant another opportunity at parenthood. Her attorney Lentz was dubious. You knew they would battle you on this, and warned during one of their meetings. Rose got a good case, and you have, let's just say, dubious choices. As I know, Jessica advised strongly, but I have to try. The court hearings carried on for weeks. Rose's legal team produced documentation and proof of Jessica and Robert's deserting, underlining Naomi's anguish and the security she had discovered under Rose's. The courtroom turned into a battlefield, each side battling for what they felt would be ideal for Naomi. On one very trying day in court, Rosa stood up. Her testimony was calm, but when I discovered Naomi, Rosa told the court she had been broken, left alone, terrified, and powerless in the forest. No child should ever go through. Jessica sat frozen in her seat, every word cutting like a dagger. Rosa's truth was indiscernible, and Jessica understood. She could not run from it. When Jessica stood up, she could feel the weight of every critical gaze in the. She started, her voice calm, but with a bad mistake I made. I let fear rule me, and so harmed the person I was meant to guard the most, but I'm not seeking pardon. I'm requesting a chance today to show that I can be better. There was a quiet as the judge leaned forward, staring at Jessica across his. Why should this court believe you changed? Jessica asked. Glasses. I'll never stop trying. So she swallowed hard, and her eyes shining with unshed tears. Whispered the court's ruling at the end of a grueling hearing. Naomi would stay with Rosa. The court notes Jessica's efforts and thinks that redemption is possible, he said gravely, but Jessica was awarded supervised control. Visits Naomi, knowing that her continuous efforts to rebuild trust will determine whether or not more interaction is needed. Outside the courtroom, Rosa went to Jessica. Today you did the right thing, she whispered softly, Jessica nodding, even though her heart still hurt from losing Naomi. Thank you. Whispers aired. Rosa looked at her for a bit before presenting a rare. Keep doing the right thing, Jessica, for Naomi's benefit.
Smile.
Sake, as Rosa left hand in hand with Naomi. Jessica, standing on the courthouse steps, a concoction of hope and grief whirling in her breast. She had lost the fight. Nevertheless, the war for redemption was far from finished. That evening, Jessica went back to an though for the first time empty house, the silence heavier than ever before, but she saw the sliver of peace long ago. The road ahead would be protracted and agonizing, yet she was at last ready to go that road. She sat down at, pulling up a notebook, the kitchen table, started drafting a letter to Naomi, filled with all the words she hadn't been able to utter before. I'm sorry, she wrote. And I will keep saying it daily in every conceivable manner until you start to believe me. Was little, yet the air in Jessica's house was thick with memories. The silence that previously choked her now felt like an empty stage ready for the first act of a new. Every day was a fight, a subdued attempt to discover direction and meaning. Beyond the ruins of what she had lost, she knew Naomi was content with Rosa, and though quick, the information both comforted and tore at her. Robert's leaving was sudden but unsurprising. One morning, Jessica woke to discover his clothing missing from the closet, his missing toothbrush from the bathroom sink, and a message on the kitchen counter. Perhaps we both should start anew and take care of ourselves. The note stung, but Jessica knew she wasn't shocked by Robert's behavior. She was simply gone. She had been drifting away for months now. She sat at the table. She crumpled the note in her fist and sensed something unusual. Relief, knowing Robert gone. Jessica set about reconstructing her life, although she poured herself into volunteer work, deciding that if she couldn't be slow and painful process, Naomi's mother could at least assist children in need of support. Initially, the work seemed embarrassing and strange, yet gradually Jessica found meaning in the little successes, reading to children at the shelter, planning events for young people with impairments, providing quiet comfort to those without anybody else. She also continued her trips to Naomi despite their constant difficulty. Tensive silences dominated the first several meetings, Naomi's eye cold and guarded, but Jessica continued to bring little presents, including puzzles and coloring books. Though she never phoned, Naomi started to ease around her slowly once more. Jessica's life fell into a new rhythm once her mother's months passed. Though the pain for Naomi never left her. One day, as Jessica was tending to a little child at the shelter, drawing, her phone rang with text message. Peered at the screen and saw Rosa's message. We're at the park today, Naomi wants. Jessica's pulse raced. She grabbed her coat and dashed outside, her pulse racing with every stride. Near the little park, Rosa had taken the children from Jessica. When she came, she spotted Naomi seated on a bench next to Rosa, her wheelchair kept close by. Seeing her daughter seated calmly in the sunlight sent a rush of feelings through Jessica. She moved gently, wary not to frighten Naomi, as the small child noticed her flutter of identification crossed her face. Surprised Jessica. Naomi smiled gently and said, Jessica, I'll always come, she muttered every time Rosa donated, knelt down next to her. Jessica nodded slightly in approval, then moved away to give them some time. Just want to play, Jessica, pointing toward the playground. Naomi hesitated, then nodded in unison as they headed to the swings. Naomi couldn't use them personally, but Jessica softly pushed the swing for her to hear her quiet giggles for the first time, wind shook her curls in what seemed like eternity. After that day, Jessica's visits to Naomi were more frequent. Her heart felt lighter. The meeting started to feel less like obligations and more like freedom, even though the court still mandated supervision. Times of true intimacy Naomi hardly spoke about. But she started to reveal Jessica small bits of her world, showing her preferred toys, mentioning the novels Rosa read to her late one afternoon as Jessica assisted. Cut through Jessica, Naomi with a dilemma, the small daughter, said silently, "Why you left me in the woods?" "I was terrified, Naomi." I admitted I was scared, like a knife swallowing hard, her neck contracting with passion. "And I made a horrible error. I thought I was acting in the greatest of interests, but I was mistaken." Naomi stared at her with sad. "More than anything, Jessica, do you still desire me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I want you to be happy. I will do all I can to make that," whispering, "happen even if it means not being with you." Naomi examined her for a second, then stretched out her little palm over Jessica's. "I'm glad with Rosa," she stated gently, "but I enjoy seeing you too. Forgiving isn't perfect either." But it was a beginning. The development Naomi made in her physical treatment provided unanticipated happiness. Jessica, with Rosa's help and therapists, Naomi started to recover some mobility, yet most of the time, she managed using her wheelchair to go a few steps with help. One beautiful afternoon, Jessica was present for one of these milestones. Naomi, Rosa's calm hands, rising from her wheelchair, leading her, made three steps toward Jessica said, looking at Naomi, her face shining with. Jessica clapped her hands, her heart bursting with pride at your outstanding performance. "Sweetheart." She knelt to tightly hold her daughter. Rosa watched. She came so far, a pleased smile on her face, and murmured silently, "And she will go much farther," Jessica said, her voice hushed. Well, despite these hopeful times, Jessica knew she could completely recover. Naomi's trust would take time, and she might never reach there totally. She was coming to see, though, that redemption was not about wiping the past. It was about showing up repeatedly regardless of the length of one evening. Jessica received a message from as she sat by herself on the veranda of her peaceful house. "Rosa, we're heading to the forest tomorrow. Naomi wants you to come." Jessica glanced at her, heart pounding. The forest, for a long time, she knew it was a haunted area by ghosts of her worst error, but it also served as the venue for her one and only proof of her having changed. With a long sigh, she typed a response, "I'll be." Jessica showed up at the edge of the forest the next day. Her heart waited. Naomi was waiting for memories, with Rosa seated in her wheelchair, and she could see Rosa's silent eagerness on her face. Is clear. "You are ready," Jessica agreed, but fear twisted in her belly. "I am ready." Together we went into the jungle. Naomi's tiny hand rested on Jessica's as they strolled along the trail the trees created. Every stride carried whispers of secrets from the past, yet for the first time Jessica thought she could handle it. As they arrived to the clearing where it had all started, Naomi turned to Jessica and grinned, asking if we can stay a little bit longer. Jessica knelt next to her, caressing a curl off her daughter's face. "For as long as you want," she murmured, enveloped in that instant. Jessica understood. She had at last made the first actual step toward the future in the still beauty of the woodland. Not only for Naomi, but also for her. There was still a lot of distance to go, yet they would stroll it alongside Jessica's forest clearing, once occupied. Now, sorrow and regret seemed almost calm. The trees, softly bathed in sunlight, no longer hovered over her with shadows of shame. Naomi sat peacefully in her wheelchair, gripping a flower she had gathered along the path. Jessica bent over beside her. A weird but welcome peace descended on her heart. Not just a fresh start meant promises to Naomi, to the life they were living, as well as to herself. Over many years, they stayed in the clearing without knowing that this was not hers to claim. Jessica let Naomi take the lead. Control. Naomi grinned up at the heavens, her curls softly swaying in the breeze. It was a calm type of peace, the sort lost for so long. "Do you Naomi asked, breaking the stillness. Think we will return here once again?
Yes.
Sweetheart, Jessica whispered, as many times as you wanted back in town the weight of. Jessica's peace stayed, but it seemed lighter every day people passed. Got more used to seeing Jessica and Naomi together at the park, at neighborhood gatherings, and even at the market where formerly the whispers had trailed. Not everyone welcomed their arrival, but Jessica no longer gave any thought. Regarding the judgment in others' perspective, she turned her attention instead on the compassion that gradually started to show up from the Fishers. Mrs. Garcia, a neighbor, brought cookies one afternoon. Hesitant of branch extended another woman from the shelter, without words. Jessica accepted all of her modest but profound offers to assist with groceries quietly. She knew she did not deserve forgiveness, not yet, but she also understood that little deeds taken consistently over time could result in actual transformation. As part of their new existence, Jessica kept helping the shelter by dedicating. She frequently accompanied the underprivileged youngsters in need, Naomi in assisting in. Her unique approach is using games and picture drawing with the younger children. One day when they were painting together, Naomi turned to Jessica and asked, One day, Jessica knelt next to her, meeting, and you believe I could walk by myself? Naomi's hopeful look, and you love, I think, she replied with a gentle smile. And regardless of what happens, we will face it together. Naomi's eyes sparkled with joy. Together, Jessica nodded. Always. For months passed as Naomi carried on. As her therapy progressed, the physicians remained hopeful even though they informed Jessica that some obstacles would still exist. Naomi might never walk. Jessica held to that. Without help, but with enough love and support, she could still live a long and happy life. Hope with everything she possessed, attending Ed for every treatment session. Supported Naomi on the difficult days when the little triumphs added up, and celebrated at each one. Though each stride forward seemed too sluggish, they celebrated every one of them, no matter how little. Naomi walked 10 steps during one session with the aid of a walker. Jessica stared with tears in her eyes as her daughter gleamed with pride. Looking back to Jessica, Naomi shouted, Did it, Naomi? Yeah, you did, baby, Jessica said, her heart bursting with love. One cool autumn morning, Jessica got a surprising letter in the mail from the court alerting her about her monitored meetings with Naomi were not needed when the court examined her development and decided that Jessica was fit to have. Tears of delight showed down her shared custody expression as she went over the document. It was more than just not complete custody. She had dared hope since she folded the letter meticulously and set it on the kitchen table, allowing the moment settle in. Later that day, she told the news to Naomi's actions during their park picnic suggest that we might have more time. Naomi asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Jessica grinned, brushing a yes, dear. Naomi hugged. We will have much more time. Curls from Naomi's forehead. Her tightly makes me happy, Mommy. Like a tsunami rolling over Jessica. Aside every uncertainty she carried, she pulled Naomi near her, heart full of thank you and hope. Their first night in Jessica's house felt like a Naomi insisted on carrying all of her beloved toys, and they spent hours together. Jessica eventually came and set her room just as she wanted before bed. Naomi asked you a story when you snuggled her into bed and smoothed the blanket over her small figure. Jessica yawned sleepily, and naturally one of the ones concerning the Princess. Jessica, who learned to fly, softly sat on the side of the bed. And once upon a time there was a princess living in a kingdom who was quite peaceful. She was unique among others, surrounded by lofty mountains and dense forests. Princesses, since she had a secret gift but couldn't walk like they could. She could fly. Naomi's eyes gleamed with wonder. At first nobody knew Jessica. The princess feared others wouldn't grasp her gift, but one day she chose to show them. She flew above the skies, and when people saw her they neither laughed or judged her. Thrilled since she at last realized that her differences made her unique. Naomi yawned once more, curling under the blankets. I enjoy that narrative, definitely speaks to me. Jessica muttered, bending down to kiss her forehead. Good night, my small friend. Princess, good night, Mommy. Naomi whispered, her voice off into sleep. Jessica stayed by her side. little longer seeing her daughter's breath rise and fall. It was an ordinary moment, but it was. Everything Jessica and Naomi had battled in the next month started, creating a life together, one full of love, patience, and little pleasures. Still has difficulties naturally. Some days were more difficult than others, but through it all they experienced side by side, Rosa stayed a vital part of their lives, providing direction and encouragement as needed. The relationship between Jessica and Rosa strengthened on mutual respect and the common love they had for one evening. Naomi was sitting on Jessica's veranda beside her three friends, observing the Naomi gazed up in the starry sky and smiled. "Do you suppose I will soar one day like the princess?" She requested. Jessica put her arm around the shoulder of her daughter. "You already have my affection. You have flown higher than anyone could have imagined." And when the stars glittered overhead, Jessica understood that the toughest aspect of their path was behind them. One stride forward would change their destiny. Fly at a time, they had discovered their way back to each other through the calm, consistent, rather than through perfection, act of love, and that exceeded mere words. Enough. Thanks for viewing. If you liked this narrative, please subscribe to avoid missing what's most important. The next, hit that bell to keep informed. Look at our other. See you in the videos for more potent narratives you won't want to miss. The following one. Disclaimer. This channel is opposed to all forms of discrimination, bigotry, intolerance, and human rights violations. The narratives presented here are original works that were crafted to foster constructive dialogue, comprehension, and introspection. The production of all content is guided by a dedication to the preservation of human dignity and the respect for diversity.